I'm gonna do my thing.
I'll do mine. All right.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Rotary. What's the date today? July what? 25? 24? 25. Welcome to East Chapel Hill Rotary on this July 25th. I'm going to get it cranked up. Ansel, will you help me with this? Thank you. Well, when Jonathan first approached me about being Sergeant at Arms, he said, is there any requirement of time that you have to take off between being president and doing Sergeant at Arms? And I said, I thought that was how I should tell him, yeah, 3 years, right? But then I thought better of it, and I said, you know what? It might feel good to be at that podium again, And it does. It feels so good. It feels so good. The power, the prestige that comes with it. Just ruling over the little people out there. I love it. So, it's on this very day in 1943 that Benito Mussolini was dismissed as Italian Prime Minister and arrested on the authority of King Victor Emmanuel III. Well, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I'm going to cling on now. I got it. No. Get them off. No, it was a privilege, but I'm so glad to have turned it over to Felix, and you are doing an outstanding job. Thank you. I do try to engage my 10-year-old with dad jokes, and I'm usually met with groans and eye rolls, so I wanted to try a few on this crowd to see if I get any different reaction. And Bart, this is not directed to you, okay? So my dentist was recently arrested for dealing drugs. I couldn't believe it. I've been going to him for 10 years or more, and I never knew he was a dentist. I was going to tell a joke about layoffs, but sadly, none of them really work. Why did the employee at the calendar company get fired? He took a day off. I was raised as an only child, and boy did that make my siblings mad. All right. Never date a tennis player. Love means nothing to them. All right. My resume is a list of things I hope I never have to do again. A woman passed out on a merry-go-round, but don't worry, she's coming around. Yeah, this is about my daughter. Oh, just a few more. There was a break-in at the wig factory, and police are combing the area. All right. So, the last one. I'm sorry. I like this one. 3 years is about right. This one I did get a chuckle out of. I'm sorry and I apologize. I'm sorry and I apologize usually mean the same thing, but not at a funeral. All right.
I think that was
Anyway, I was talking to Robert here earlier. The UNC, well, actually the ACC just had their annual pre-football season hullabaloo, down in Charlotte. Heels are picked 12th. I don't know if you all realize that. To finish 12th in the ACC. I want to see by a show of hands, who thinks we're going to finish higher than that? Yeah? Like that. And who thinks lower than that? I know. Yeah. And Jim, the last three are in dire straits, I think. One of them doesn't have a coat. But we're starting on Monday, September 1st, I think, Labor Day. Here in Keenan Stadium, sold out against TCU. Should be a lot of fun. So I just wanted to throw a word in for UNC there. Before I let Felix come up here, I do want to remind folks about Teacher Supply Store. We've got volunteer list links circulating, as well as fundraising opportunities coming up in October 19th, 20th, and 21st. So I hope you'll take a look at that when those come by and sign up. It's a lot of fun, great cause, our signature project. So there you have it. Mr. President, please come
Thank you.
on up.
Good afternoon and thanks for coming. Just want to add to what Tim said about our flagship teacher supply store. It's happening on August 19th, 20th, and 21st. And we want you to do three things. One is donate. Two is spread the word to your friends, families, and colleagues. And three, we want you guys to volunteer. So the slots are open. If you need any information, just reach out to me and I can send you the links. So, yes, Lorenzo.
Hey Felix, can I just add, for anyone who's a new member to our club and you just haven't gotten fully involved, I really urge you to volunteer at the supply store. It is one of our main commitments to the community. You'll be deeply moved by what we do for hundreds of teachers in the Chapel Hill district and their gratitude and the impact we have. It's one of the coolest things you can do to see how we make a difference.
Thank you, Lorenzo. And so far, we have raised $30,000 for the teacher supply store. And we need to unlock a $20,000 donation from an anonymous donor. So let's give. Any amount, any small amount is appreciated. There is a card going around for our good friend, Fred McLaren. He's still recovering and he will appreciate your well wishes. DG Martin has not also been feeling well. Does anybody has any updates on him? DG Martin?
He's very private about it. He's not well, but he's very private and doesn't tell us what the is. But
Okay. Yeah, please keep him in your thoughts.
And speaking of DT, I'm Bart here from Rotary Club of Oxford, and DT regularly does some articles that are in our local newspaper, and I just happened to bring one of the papers I gave it to Felix today if you guys want to look at it. It actually has to do with Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
Can you do me a favor?
Yes, sir.
Speaking of Bart, I didn't ask if there were any guests or visiting Rotarians.
All right. I'll do that. And then let's congratulate, I don't know, Linda is here? Linda was honored by the Chapel Borough, by Linda and Brian, for being home heroes this week. So, congratulations, Linda. And with that, do you have any guests for visiting Rotarians? Yes, Reverend.
You have a guest, my friend and neighbor, Tanya Helms.
And with that, I'm going to call on Big Baduo to give an award.
excuse me.
Kim, usually I don't like to follow you, but I feel really safe today. I'm here today representing your East Chapel Hill Rotary Club Foundation. Your foundation stands right now this morning at $1.4 million and is growing toward $1.5 million. One of the reasons that it's growing is because of a person like Karen Levine. Karen, come up, please. You know that Karen, 35 years of service to the United States State Department as a diplomat, 20 years as a Rotarian, and joined our club in 2019. And she recently completed her contribution to the foundation of $5,000 and is eligible for the Phil Rominger Fellowship. So let's congratulate. She's number 87 and counting. Thank you, Felix.
Thank you, Dick. And without further ado, I'm going to call Jim Hebner to introduce our guest speaker. Jim.
I'm wondering here if there's anybody here who has not been touched by the flood, but to put it another way, have any of you here owned property or had been in any way affected by the flood in the last week with property damage or injury anywhere? So some of you have had that at your homes where you live?
My business.
Excuse me?
My insurance office got it,
Oh, and where is that?
behind the chamber.
Behind the chamber. Oh my goodness, yes.
And I lost a car.
Yeah, and a car.
But I have good insurance.
So we'll be taking up another collection. What we are seeing right now, some of us here are old enough to remember the book written over 50 years ago by Alan Toffler, Future Shock. You remember that, in which he talked about the pace of change is accelerating. And we've seen times when most of you have heard of Moore's Law, where we get every 6 months, $1 buys you twice as much computing as it did 6 months before, and that's gotten to the point that even that doesn't work. We're doing quantum computing now that is not possible for anything, that we're ignoring the ones and zeros and moving to the next level, to a level we don't understand. And now we're seeing this happen with storms. We had known global warming was here, and it was getting warmer and warmer. As I said to Mark a while ago, we were talking about it, the tea in his cup right there was doing no damage at all, unless it happened to fall onto his laptop and ruin all the records of everything he had. Well, that's what happened to Eastgate last week. We are really, really lucky to have a professional with this kind of experience that you see in the bio, and with the commitment to dealing with the number of times that we are seeing emergency management become something more than just routine cleaning, but it's a matter of life and death and financial health for so many people. He's going to talk about that in general today. And then, of course, we have lost Eastgate for the time being, and he's going to update us on that as well. So please give a good East Chapel Hill Rotary welcome to our speaker today, Kirby Sanders.
Well, thank you all for having me. I'm going to try to, I usually like to walk around, but I didn't want to wear the lapel, and then I figured I would stand in the way of the screen so you wouldn't be able to see the presentation. But thanks for having me. I'm Kirby Saunders. I'm the Director of Emergency Services, and I want to thank Jim for inviting me, asking us to come. I put together a short presentation. We're going to hit a lot of topics here. I just want to start by acknowledging that although I'm the Emergency Services Director for Orange County, each of our municipal partners has a strong emergency management team within the towns as well. And we depend on a robust network of response partners in our community to accomplish our mission. I also want to acknowledge that whether you are physically impacted or you were present in our community in the last several weeks, you've been impacted, whether it be psychological or emotional. So I just want to acknowledge that and remind you that we're here as well. We're with you, and we will continue to be with our communities and guide our community through the recovery process, which no doubt is going to be extensive. I'm going to start with just a quick overview of what flooding is. There's common terminology that we use a lot in our field and in regulatory fields that a lot of folks find confusing. I do myself. I'll be the first to admit I'm not a flooding or a floodplain manager by trade. I'm an emergency manager. And so I'm not the expert on hydrology or engineering. I know just enough to be dangerous and also just enough to be reasonable. And so I'm going to give you just a quick overview of what we know is the problem in our community. And also it's important to note, while it's normal right now following an event that we want to find answers and some want to cast blame, and a lot of us are focused on the next storm or how do we prevent this from happening again. It is not just a Chapel Hill problem or an Orange County problem or a North Carolina problem. The flooding threat we face in our country is a national problem. It's a worldwide problem. The challenges we have regarding development and floodplains are all across the country. It's just not here in Chapel Hill. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll try to leave room for questions at the end, but we'll go over that overview, a quick synopsis of our response countywide, a little bit about the transition to recovery, and then more importantly, what should we be doing now as individuals, as community members for the next storm? Because inevitably what we went through in Chantal will happen again, and it will likely happen in the next not so distant future. And I don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately, to tell you what day that will happen on. If I did, I'd be a millionaire, right? But just a quick overview of flooding terms. Riverine flooding, which is what most people think of when we think of flooding, where you have a stream or a creek that just overflows its banks. So on a normal given day, there is a stream or creek or river that overflows its banks and causes flooding to neighboring and adjoining properties. That is one type of flooding. You'll see from the historical data that is not our primary cause of concern in our community. I do want to call attention just to the warning time. Usually when we have a riverine flooding, we have a forecast. We have a forecasted amount. This is going to forecast, this is going to peak, this is going to crest at a certain date and time. That is usually enough warning time, 6 to 12 hours, but the flood itself lasts about less than a week. In broad terms, locally we do have riverine flooding. That is usually not what causes the most extensive damage. And I just highlighted a few of the creeks and streams in our community. Only one in Orange County has a forecasted capability, and that's the Eno River. So broadly speaking, right now, the creeks, the Morgan Creeks, the Bowling Creeks, while we have storm gauges and river gauges, they are not forecasted by National Weather Service, hydrology, forecast prediction centers. And I'll talk about why in the end here. Yes.
Just curious what Booker Creek did on that.
I didn't include all of them.
Okay.
Yeah, this is just a general, you get the idea of the points of streams and creeks that we would see riverine flooding problems. The flash flooding threat is what causes the most damage in our community, as does in most every community. That is where we have extremely fast rate of a result of an intense amount of rainfall. So a riverine flooding problem is directly tied to the amount of rain that falls over a given period of time. So we look for the amount of rain in a watershed or catch basin as a predictor of what that river will do. Flash flooding, unlike the amount of rain, it really is dependent on how fast the rain falls. So just you put in the context there, we have the total amount of rain usually results in riverine flooding problems. How the amount of rain that falls at a given point in time, how fast it falls, usually results in our flash flooding threats. In Chantal, the peak of the storm, we were taking about 6.9 inches per hour, the rate of rainfall. A normal, really heavy thunderstorm rainfall event in our community is about 1 to 2 inches per hour. So we were more than double that amount during Chantal. So that starts to paint the picture. We also have localized storm flooding issues, and those are usually blocked culverts, stormwater drains. There might not be enough capacity in the stormwater system to divert, and usually we see localized stormwater flooding problems, you and I, is when we're driving down the road in a heavy rain event and there's ponding on the road, right? So that's usually a localized stormwater flooding problem. All three of these in an urbanized environment can lead to flooding, and at the end of the day, flooding is flooding for those who are flooded, right? Doesn't matter necessarily if it's riverine flooding, flash flooding, or stormwater problem, or it's still flooding, right? In our community, in a lot of communities, especially in urbanized, developed areas, we tend to look for and point blame at those stormwater systems, right? That they maybe don't have the capacity, the culverts may be blocked, there may be blocked drainage outlets, so like the watershed may be blocked. While they can contribute to exacerbation of stormwater problems and flooding, that was not necessarily the only problem with Chantal, right? So it was purely the amount of rain that fell, how fast it fell. And there was, again, I'm not an engineer, but there is very little to no engineering that can be done to out-engineer a Chantal storm, right? Just set the stage there for you. I do want to highlight just what is a floodplain. Most people don't understand necessarily what this is and what it isn't. So this is a real quick anatomy. A lot of people also don't understand what a 100-year and a 500-year is. They think that's one time in 100 years or one time in 500 years. And so I just want to make sure we all understand. On the normal anatomy of a river, we have the flood channel, or the creek or stream. There is the floodway, which is typically referred to as the regulatory floodway, that there's usually no development, new development in the floodway. Any type of development in that floodway raises the base flood elevation, and in reasonable sense, all that does is speed up the velocity of the water, right? So we remove our capacity for the floodplain to do what it normally does, which is go out into the floodplain. It slows down, it disperses over a geographic area. If we block that from happening, the building, a development, or something, all we're doing is, we're not changing necessarily the base flood immediately, but we're speeding up the velocity. The water doesn't have anywhere to disperse horizontally to. Then we have flood fringes, right? So these are what we typically see a lot of residential properties in, that are in a floodplain, or in these flood fringes, where we have, the cursory edges. These are the known, and you'll see the example, the known floodplains. Beyond that, what is not on the map, or the impacts for future rain events. So how is climate impacting us? We know what the floodplain is, but how is climate change impacting that floodplain? Is it pushing it out further, greater beyond the floodplain? And I'll give you some highlights here, what we learned from Chantal, and I'll go ahead and just park it here. 22% of the properties that flooded in Orange County during Chantal were not in a floodplain. 22%. UNC just released a study last week that over the last 80 storms, national storms in our country, 43% of the residential properties were not in a floodplain. So, the reality of the story is we can debate nationally, socially in our circles about the cause of climate change and what we need to do to slow it down. The reality of the matter is we are experiencing it today, right now. These are the impacts, right? Hotter temperatures lead to more precipitation, faster, bigger storms. We're going to continue to see this over and over and over again until we find ways to address it, meaning how we respond to it. It's not necessarily prevention, that's important, but we got to be prepared to how we respond to it. I do want to highlight again when I said the 100-year floodplain, that means you have a 1% annual chance of being flooded. So 1% annually. That doesn't mean once per 100 years. That means every year, 1% chance you could be flooded if that 100-year flood occurs every single year. The 500-year floodplain, that's a 0.2% chance of annual flooding. So in the grand scheme of things, 1% versus 99% of the time you're fine may seem okay. Just keep in mind that is the floodplain as we know it. That's not including any impacts, hotter temperatures, greater number of storms, the velocity of rainfall. So that's 1% annual chance. Is a bet you could get. That could be happening 5 times in 1 year, right? And that's the reality of the world we live in. Nationally, flooding is our greatest threat. It is the most costly damage threat in the United States. It has exceeded far more than terrorism, biological or hazardous material threats and incidents in our country combined. So the cost of flooding annually is our largest national threat. It's been responsible for about 10,000 deaths on record since 1900. About 90% of all the federal disaster declarations are from a flood or flood-related natural event. So it is by and large the number one most frequent threat we see in our country. This is a lot of data here. I promise Jim I'll include a lot of data, but I will. If you can't see this, there's a link at the end where you can go and look at this information yourself. This is from our regional hazard mitigation plan. This is more specific looking at Orange County. So we have flash flooding events and flood events, about 44 flash flood events since 1999 to 2023. No deaths or injuries from either one of those, but you can see the approximate amount of reported property damage. I want to just put a caveat that is coming from insurance claims. So that is not reflective of actual amounts. That is what people claimed. And so we know that there are damages that far exceed this amount that just weren't claimed, whether it be approved or not. And then we have crop damages, about $5 million. As you can imagine, the riverine flood versus a flash flood tends to cause more crop damages because it's usually happening in rural portions that are usually by and large or farmlands. So, like I said in the beginning, Eno is our only forecasted one towards the western part, northern part of Orange County, and some of those creeks and streams break their banks. In a riverine flood, we would experience flood damage. By and large, the big graphic on the right, the big pie wheel, is just where the number of impacts and occurrences and structures in comparison in Orange County that are at risk. As you can see, 50%, it's actually about 50.4% of the structures that are at the greatest risk for flooding are in the town limits of Chapel Hill proper, as far as Orange County is concerned. This is a quick number here. Residential properties, 50-year, 100-year, and a 500-year floodplain. There are 362 residential properties in the 500-year floodplain. About 81% of those are what we call pre-firm. So I'll just pause real quick and tell you what firm is. That's flood inundation rate maps. So 1968 was the year that flood maps were created nationally. So before 1968, we didn't have any way to know where flooding was occurring or likely to occur. So we had a lot of development in areas that we now know are not the best places to develop. Residential properties, businesses, etc. It took in Orange County about another 10 years before they became adopted standard regularization. Right? So 1978 is when the town of Chapel Hill adopted floodplain regulations, adopted the flood inundation rate maps, and began to start to regulate the development in floodplains. It took until 1981 until Orange County as a whole began to adopt floodplain regulations. So just to put that in perspective, almost more than half, 81% of these residential properties were built pre-1968. Pre-flood inundation rate maps. So that presents itself a challenge, especially if it's an occupied home or business or residence. How do we get that out of the floodplain, right? It's a big challenge. There are commercial structures, about 41 in the 500-year plan, and one public building. I asked our team yesterday, can you help me identify what that one public building is? Because I know if there's one on the slide, someone's going to ask it. And we don't know exactly where that is. I didn't have time to dive into exactly what that one public building is. If I had a venture, I would say it would probably be Carborough Public Works facility that was damaged significantly in Chantal. But I can get the answer back to Jim so he can tell you. I can follow up on that. All right, just an overview of response. I know you all went through this or you experienced this, so I don't want to spend a lot of time. I'll just hit the high marks for you. A common question we've got over the last couple of weeks was about alert, warning, and evacuations. This was by and large a flash flooding event. We had, again, no way to predict. And as you can see, I'm not going to go through all of these, but starting on July 3rd, our team began to get indications from the National Weather Service that Chantal was forming. That initial one was risk for some heavier rain across eastern North Carolina Sunday and possibly into Monday. That was the initial one on 3rd. All the way up until the 6th of July, early that morning, 5:45, the storm had shifted, and the most likely rainfall forecast was 1.5 to 2 inches on the morning of Sunday. And that ranged for Orange County. The reasonable worst case scenario was 3.1 to 3.7.
Wow.
It wasn't until about 6 p.m. that evening that we got upgraded, that we could experience 69 inches. And at 7 p.m. we started taking swiftwater rescue calls. So we had very little advance warning, in less than an hour that we went more than double the forecasted amount that we were expected to receive. And that is not any, that's not any blame to National Weather Service. They don't have crystal balls either. The storm shifted, and that is always the case in these large storms, that we don't know exactly where the rain will fall until the storm gets closer and closer. We do typically start to see more indication beyond an hour that we're going to get heavy precipitation. But our assessment, 1 to 3 inches, the max 4 inches, that's usually an event that our community and our capacity can sustain. Right? Beyond that, it's right on the fringes, right on the edges, but beyond that is when we start getting more concerned and we lean forward with evacuations. At the end of it, we had as much as 10 inches of rain. 10.7 inches were recorded north of Hillsborough in Orange County. Some local higher amounts, some made lesser amounts depending on where you were, but we went far beyond even what was exceeded at that 6 p.m. or briefed at that 6 p.m. briefing. We activated early our Emergency Operations Center on the 6th. We began operations about 12 noon, virtual operations. Orange County is, our posture when Orange County is in the cone of uncertainty on a tropical storm, we're active. We're monitoring it closely. We're meeting about every 2 hours. We're pulling resources and we're preparing for the worst case scenario. When we ran that posture all the way up until about 8 p.m., 6 to 8 p.m., when we started taking impacts, and we went to full-scale activation on 11 p.m. Sunday night, all the way through Friday at 8 p.m. That whole week. So we ran 24/7 operations throughout the whole week in person in our Emergency Operations Center in Hillsborough. We declared a state of emergency. Technically, it was done on the 6th, Sunday evening the 6th. In my conversation with Chair Bedford, we declared a local state of emergency about 8 p.m. Sunday evening. Unfortunately, by that time, our clerk of the board had lost power, had lost internet, and so we couldn't get an electronic signature until Monday morning. And it was too dangerous for us to worry about sending the deputy to the chair's house to have her sign the document, right? And then change things when you get it done Monday morning. So it wasn't executed until Monday, but it was actually declared the night before. Governor Stein, as you know, declared a declaration, a retroactive emergency declaration on the 16th of July to necessitate further state support in the recovery effort. By and large, we had about 7,953 911 calls between 7 p.m. and 3 a.m. In Orange County. To put that in perspective, that's well more than our normal threshold, which is about 40, maybe 60 on a busy day calls per hour. And so that was quite overwhelming to our center. I'm pleased that we only had 474 that we called dropped calls or went into queue. So we called every one of those 474 back once the time allowed, but we have a robust system in process. So if we ever get in a situation where we're overwhelmed, our calls will automatically roll to another 911 center in the state, and they can send that through our computer system back to us to be dispatched. So no call went unanswered. Those hang-ups where people called, they might have waited longer than they expected to, and they hung up, and we called them all back. But I want to highlight too, just real quick here, the 70 swiftwater rescues. Those blue dots on the map, I know it's a little blurry, are locations of all the swiftwater rescues that happened, again, between 7 p.m. and 3 a.m. And that's a testament to our first responders. And so I'll be remiss if I didn't applaud their efforts. That is, by far exceeds anything we've ever done in the past in our community. But that's also a testament to our community's commitment to invest in those capabilities over the last number of years. Town and county partners have invested in swiftwater rescue resources, state and federal support to ensure we have that capacity and capability locally. In a normal, there's no such thing as a normal hurricane, but a large traditional hurricane, we would have mobilized additional resources from out of the county to be here in the county to address this, had we know what's going to happen. Again, we were going on forecast assumptions, so we did not pull those resources in or make those requests. And that's my timer, so I'm going to speed up a little bit.
Most of those in the dark at night, those rescues?
And those are 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. All of them were in the dark, in the middle of the night, in raging floodwaters. I'll just caveat here, you'll see me as an opportunity at the end here. The majority of those rescues required boats with engines. The majority of rescues we conduct in Orange County, Camelot, and Chapel Hill areas are what we call static rescues, where it's just an inflatable raft. They can walk beside it, load people in it, walk them back out, or use ropes. The water was too fast moving for this, and we ran out of the number of boats with engines during this storm. We did pull in Dade County, came to rescue, and High Point Fire Department as well came to provide mutual aid support in the middle of the night for us. This is just a real quick survey of where the damages occurred. Residential estimates, we're up to about 421 total now. A variety of categories, everything from affected all the way to destroyed. I believe that destroyed category currently still at 4. Not that it really matters. If you were impacted, you were impacted, but destroyed means the property was likely shifted off the foundation. Or the water exceeded the height of the ceiling in a living space. So if you flooded your crawl space, for example, in the FEMA standards, that is affected, right? If you flood your whole basement all the way up to your floor joist, it doesn't get into your living area, that's category is called affected, right? Minor would be it gets into your living space, but it's below the outlets, or maybe just above the outlets. 48 inches, that's a major. If it gets beyond that, all the way to the ceiling, that's destroyed. This is called windshield damage assessment. These are not detailed going in like an insurance assessment. We use this to get a baseline. I was going to spend some time on this, but I just want to highlight where we are. Initial incident is that big red disaster button. Immediately beyond that is a response and relief. That's the swiftwater rescues and the stabilization. That's emergency housing and shelters that we activated at Smith Middle School. And that is also begins to bridge the gap, what we call muck out. Those are initial relief operations. So we bring in, work with partners like Habitat and other VOAD partners or volunteer organizations that are within our community and external to our community to bring them in to mobilize those initial relief efforts. Simultaneously, we're working to posture ourselves for the long-term recovery. And the typical pattern is we respond. We do the emergency protective measures, sheltering, rescues, those things, the initial stuff with muck out, with volunteer teams or contractors if property owners can afford it. Somewhere along there, that way we also, like in a normal event, we would get a state declaration for individual and public assistance, and we would get a federal declaration for individual and public assistance. Those are the primary mechanisms that we lean on to provide initial financial recovery for those impacted. The long-term recovery group then forms to kind of meet the needs after that point, right? So I should hit those. These are just a few of the organizations that were involved in the first 48 hours in our community. Many of you may have heard of most of these. Some of them you may have never heard of. But we depend on the North Carolina Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster, or NCVOAD, to mobilize volunteer resources. There are about 70 organizations in the VOAD. Some are largely were created post-Helene, but the vast majority of them are names you probably know. Habitat, Baptist on Missions, Team Rubicon, which is a group of veteran volunteer organization that does a lot of disaster muck out and clean out and repair, as well as damage and debris. So a lot of these agencies came in and began their assessments and set down roots. Team Rubicon is demobilized, and today they were here for 2 weeks, working largely in the Weather Hill Point area along with other partners, both local and out of the area partners. As I mentioned on the recovery assistance, we categorize this into 2 categories really. Individual assistance, that's direct assistance financially usually to those impacted or displaced survivors impacted by a storm. During Helene, you may have seen all the social media comments about the $750 assistance payments. That's individual assistance from the federal level. That's the initial emergency assistance. Those impacted, the maximum threshold is $43,500 that the federal government will provide. There's public assistance, which is those that are publicly funded, so damage to infrastructure that is publicly funded, as well as the help reimburse the overall cost of the response. And then we have the Small Business Administration. Their assistance they provide is usually in the form of low or no interest loans to private sector partners. We have determined, as this point here that we have met the threshold for all of those. Each one of those has a federal act that describes the threshold and what you must meet in order to be eligible. For individual assistance, it's 25 major or destroyed primary residential properties. So it can't be a rental unit or a second vacation home. It has to be a residence that you live in as your primary residence. It has to be major or destroyed. For public assistance in Orange County, the county as a whole collectively have had to expend $684,000 before we're eligible for a federal presidential declaration. Small Business Administration is really low bar. That's 3 businesses, major or destroyed. And that triggers that. So we've met the threshold for all 3 of those. As you know, nationally in Washington, there's a lot of uncertainty at FEMA right now, as well as with the administration. And so once we qualify, the state also has to qualify for the federal thresholds. We don't, at this time, assess that we don't believe it's not our responsibility. Our conversations with the governor's office and state emergency management, we don't believe the state is going to meet its required federal threshold for a federal disaster declaration. Fortunately, we live in a state that has a state-administered individual assistance program, which is rare in the country. So kudos to North Carolina for having that, and we expect that to come online next week. It mirrors the exact same thing as FEMA. So state's individual assistance program mirrors FEMA, so they'll be providing direct financial assistance to those impacted. We will supplement that, obviously, with support from volunteer organizations and partners within our community and externally as well. And we do that through the formation of a long-term recovery group, which we're still in the process of forming. Just a quick highlight of some of the things that the long-term recovery group will do, but again, the primary purpose is to assist individuals and families in their recovery process. It is to help them navigate things like, where do I even begin? What do I start with? Connecting them with support, coordinating things like home repair or rebuilding, refurnishing, reclothing, providing them medication reimbursement or assistance. Just helping to navigate that using the network of both community organizations, not-for-profits, faith-based community and non-faith-based organizations, as well as local government programs, bringing those together and synergizing the effort so we can meet those unmet needs, first identifying and secondarily that collaboratively work to address them. That will be a long-term process, as you saw from that slide, months, if maybe not years in some cases. I'm really proud of groups like Habitat who are engaged in the very first day or 2, and they're doing remarkable work. The goal of the long-term recovery group is to continue to support those organizations, to do that work, empower them, support them however we possibly can, and really help coordinate so that they can maximize their efforts, our local community efforts, maximize the benefit to those who need it the most. You may have heard of this. Early on, we worked to establish a community giving fund. This is a collaboration between all the towns and the county to really begin to build a disaster relief fund. We've started this conversation well before Chantal, but this is an opportunity. First and foremost, I would encourage you to continue to give in to organizations like Habitat, in your local churches, in your local organizations. Empower them, continue to support them financially. Those are really critically important to continue doing that. If you don't know where to go or don't know where to give, or you don't have an organization that you trust or work with, you can go to the NC VOAD, and that will give you a list of all the organizations. You can also donate here. And this community giving fund will be used as a fund of last resort. Right? So if there's inevitably a need that can't be met by any of our volunteer organizations and partners and churches and groups locally, the last option we may go to is the fund here to pull from. So our goal is to maximize and stretch this fund as far as it is possible to do. It is not designed to be a fund that we just start handing out checks. Right? And I use the example is, if an organization says we have the labor, we have the resources to repair or rebuild this home, but we don't have the money to buy the materials, and we can't raise the money to buy the materials, we may turn to this fund to buy those materials. And that's just an example of collaboration and synergizing effort. Real quick, I'm going to skip ahead as fast as I can because I want to leave some time for questions. But the most important takeaways from here is know your risk. being productive, being proactive and prepared for any emergency is crucial, is critical. We've all heard, I mean, is this news to anybody that you should be prepared for 3 days to be self-sufficient? Anybody's the first time they've ever heard this? All right, usually not the case, right? But usually we don't take action. So I hope today, when I walk away from here, if you don't have a 3-day emergency supply kit that you can get out of your house in a matter of minutes, I want you to create one. You can visit radioorange.org, which again I have at the back of the slide, of what should be in that kit, how to build it. Ensuring adequate insurance coverage is a key, essential element, especially if you don't live in a floodplain. And my next highlight this slide is, anybody here live where it rains?
Yeah.
Then you live where it can flood. That's the best message I can tell you. If you live where it rains, you live where it can flood. I'm glad we have an insurance agent right in the back. And I'll just, not to pick on insurances at all, but most people are not aware of this until it happens to them, but homeowners insurance typically does not cover anything related to a flood unless it's like a pipe break maybe, or an appliance that malfunctions, right? If it's external, whether it be the storm drain in front of your driveway backs up and floods your house, or the river rises and floods your house, you're on your own. Your insurance company's not going to cover it. If you don't live in a high-risk flood plain or high-risk area, it is relatively affordable to have flood insurance. And it's a peace of mind that, for the life of me, I can't understand why people don't. I live on top of a hill. I'm 80 feet above base flood elevation. I have flood insurance because I've seen it time and time and time again. So many people have lost. Especially this last thing, about 22% that were impacted during Chantal in Orange County were not in a floodplain. They were not in a high-risk area, and they got impacted. Less than 2% had flood coverage. So all those 400 and some residential properties I just showed you a minute ago, less than 2% had any coverage. That also went to comprehensive vehicle coverage. We saw a lot of people lost vehicles that didn't have comprehensive. So if you don't have comprehensive, I would encourage you to talk to your agent about getting comprehensive coverage for things like flood. This particularly is Weather Hill Point. This shows the residential properties. Each one of those dots is a damage assessment and the floodplain. And you'll see properties, those all, I believe, are, the orange is major and the red is destroyed, right? A lot of those property owners we're hearing, the flood maps may have changed in the last 5 years, and the flood maps are updated routinely. And some of those people said that their property fell out of the floodplain, so they dropped their insurance. And the reality is, if you live in a high-risk area and you have a mortgage, more than likely your lender is going to require you to have flood insurance. They're going to protect that investment, right? And so when that is no longer a requirement, I can see where it's possible, financially feasible to say, well, if it's not required, I'm not going to have it, right? And here's an example of that seemingly good decision having a bad consequence. So bottom line, floodsmart.gov is where you can go to assess your risk. You can get a quote. You can talk to your agent. You can determine your eligibility for flood insurance. Right? Last highlight, I promised I would show Eastgate. A lot of people have questions about Eastgate. So this highlights the problem. Right? This is Eastgate on the screen here. That red hashed area is the regulatory floodway. That is the river that we've built or allowed and sometimes built, a shopping center on top of. There's no amount of engineering or stormwater control or design that can out-engineer that river. No amount. So this is going to continue to happen and happen and happen. And the more development we do and do things like lift it above its base flood elevation or do any other things, it's just going to cause the river, the water to speed up faster. So instead of a flood problem, we're going to have houses, homes downstream wipe off the foundation because the velocity of water will just be increased exponentially. So some things we can do, I think, opportunities, we've kind of assessed these. One, continue our participation in the National Flood Insurance Program, continue to instill strong flood regulations. If you all remember what's happening in Texas and the Camp Mystic, that's a good example. A lot of private developers can out-engineer themselves out of the floodplain. So we see this about once or twice a year, or someone wants to develop and they want to challenge their property's existence in the floodplain, and they will hire an engineer and spend a lot of money to basically prove FEMA wrong, that they're not in the floodplain. Camp Mystic in Texas, what happened there is horrific. That's a good example. less than a year ago, that camp was removed from the floodplain because they challenged it and they won. And they got engineers to tell you this is not. So when you're out of the floodplain, you can expand, you can build, you don't have any lower regulation, right? So it's lucrative for a developer. But again, we have floodplains and flood mapping now for a reason. We're creating a problem over and over again when we avoid that. So I think we can strengthen our regulations and resist I won't say fight back, but resist the urgency to put development over safety. We can improve our stormwater design standards. So just recently, Chapel Hill improved theirs from 25-year flood. That's what the systems were designed for 25 and 50-year floods in our communities, a lot of communities. And so they just revamped those to a 100-year storm. And what we just went through was a 1,000-year storm. So, while this might help, might not be enough, right? So we've got to have serious conversation about that. Education and outreach is also important, and this continued mitigation actions are really critically important, right? And I just want to highlight that 1-to-6 ratio. For every dollar we invest in mitigation, improvements, prevent this from happening, we save about $6 on the response and recovery. So $1 invested, $6 saved in the response. I'm going to leave you with this. You take a picture and share your information. I'm going to stop here and talk about any questions. I have about 10 minutes, so thanks, Jim, for reminding me. I had a question in the back. Yes, sir.
Did you say that again? Did you say it's that arbitrary that Kent Mystic could decide to?
Well, we can't.
Did we decide that Kent Mystic was no longer in the floodplain?
Yeah,
They could
so
find their way out of that?
essentially, FEMA allows an appeal process if your property is in the floodplain. And so companies and organizations that have a lot of funds will hire engineers and architects and designers and experts to prove that what they want to do will improve the property or that it's not in the floodplain. They'll design a bunch of engineering scenarios and forward it back to contest and appeal that property is in the floodplain. And at some point along the way, the state agencies, not locals, but state agencies have to determine if that is sufficient enough and they support it. Ultimately, it's up to the state to determine. So that's what happened in Texas at Camp Mystic. They challenged the floodplain. They hired an engineer to present a contrasting opinion of the floodplain, how it was not where it should be, and a lot of the rationale. And someone made the decision, at Texas Department of Emergency Management to remove that and exempt that property in that particular building from the floodplain. So they allowed them to expand and develop and contribute to the problem.
So what was the biggest single surprise you got? I'm talking about something other than the volume of water. Every disaster is a surprise of some sort. What was the biggest single surprise you noticed?
Just the volume of water was my biggest surprise. We do this over and over and over again. I think the other important part to note is unlike, we got a lot of questions, and I certainly understand about the disaster declaration process. And so what we're doing now is what we do every disaster. And just put it in context, we have, in a normal tropical event, we will have the governor declare an emergency declaration, usually before the storm hits. And that is to move, and the president sometimes does that at the federal level, right? Helene scenario, large storms coming. That's necessary as an emergency declaration to move resources into that area to be pre-positioned before the storm ever impacts. Prior to 2005 and Hurricane Katrina, that was the big issue in Katrina. It took days for the federal government to respond because that was not legally allowed. That's been corrected. We didn't have that with this because we had a small storm. And so geography-wise, we have 13 counties impacted out of 100 as opposed to 49 counties out of 100 impacted. So we didn't have that emergency declaration. The federal declaration is a major disaster declaration. That's the one we have to be eligible for. And so we've had to do our process to prove eligibility to get to the state. So we become eligible for state assistance, and the state then assesses its eligibility for federal assistance. So that's where it's been so delayed. It feels like it's delayed, but the governor's correct when he visited the other week. We didn't need the governor's emergency declaration at the time because we were handling the rescues and responses. Right? And we don't have to have a state government declaration to activate individual assistance either. So I think that just, what the governor's declaration does is amplify the importance that there's need here, there's impact. It mobilizes the state to provide all resources it can, and it sends the message. And so should we need a federal declaration? or the state meets its threshold, I'm certain that the governor will request to the president for a disaster declaration. I don't know what that outcome will be, though.
Just in the national scale, where does fire stand with floods in terms of damage? You started that at the beginning of your talk.
Fire?
Fire, yeah, in the country.
Wildfire?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so in Orange County, I can't really speak nationally on that because I didn't look at it, but Orange County, it is one of the lowest risks we have is wildfire.
Sure, that was, okay, got it.
Think some more about Eastgate for us. So they spent a year, over $1 million trying to get ready for this kind of thing, and obviously didn't work. Is that just going to be a dead zone for this community?
I can't answer that. Honestly, I'm not the engineer and I'm not familiar with exactly what happened, what they did, but all I can tell you is that that property is in the middle of a floodway. It's a regulatory floodplain, right? It should, here or there, it should never have been built there, but we can't do anything about that now, so we have to invest in how do we respond to it now. Some of the opportunities you saw in the slide were, I think one of the ways we can address that will be eventually at some point in time, there's going to be, these properties will be so destroyed that they can't physically come back to that location. And I think that's our biggest opportunity in our community right now is we can develop a pre-disaster recovery plan. So think about where we would want an Eastgate at that wasn't in the floodplain. Let's have that conversation now. Let's zone it. Let's design it. Let's plan it out. So when that day comes, that it's no longer economically feasible to rebuild there again, we're going to go here to this location. It's safer, efficient, effective, and accomplishes the same economic goals. That is a very tricky question and conversation for sure. I don't have all the answers about how do we address that right this second, and that's ultimately not Orange County problem. So yeah.
How often does the floodplain map get reanalyzed? Does it change every 5, 10
Yeah, they're usually updated at least every 10 years, 5 to 10 years.
Okay, and I assume that development like in Fordham and Elliott Road now, that's got to change the floodplain in that whole basin there in Chapel Hill. Is that fair?
By and large, the floodplain, the maps themselves are based largely on topography. The local development has to make assessments and determinations of what any development in that floodplain will do, but by and large, it does not change the location of the floodway, flood zone. Again, it changes how fast it moves, but it doesn't change necessarily where the water will go beyond some incremental measures that you can't put on the map per se. But by and large, putting a building in the middle of the floodplain won't drastically shift the map, the flooding locations. It will just change the velocity of the water. It's going to its normal, which is based on topography. So as long as the topography doesn't change, hopefully we don't have any volcanoes that would change the topography. But unless that doesn't, by and large, if that doesn't change, then the map itself doesn't change drastically. I will say the caveat, several versions ago FEMA did include an experimental layer of what climate impacts would look like and how it may impact the floodplain, more water falling in different locations. It was on the fringe. It wasn't something that was going to be regulated. It was just more of a planning feature. That has been removed from what I can see, and this context about climate change and nationally. I think it's really incredibly important that we come back to that at some point in time so we can see where these properties that outside the floodplain may be impacted. I think that's our biggest change. And questions back, Gentleman Stanley.
Oh, hi, thank you for coming. I'm trying to wrap my head around the notion that you guys did over 60 rapid water rescues, and that conjures up visions of what I saw on the TV in Texas. So these were similar situations, people in homes that are near waterways, and the house became isolated and was at risk of loss of life.
And the majority, I would say about half of them were vehicle rescues, people in vehicles in water. They drove through flood waters, or the water rose so quickly that they couldn't get out of them. The other half were people trapped in their residences. There were a few areas that we couldn't access that were residential neighborhoods because the water was too fast and the engines weren't large enough. And so that was a compounding problem. And there was there was delays in a lot of it because there's just sheer number and volume exceeded our boats. We have about 11 boats in the county total. Only about 6 of them have engines. So I think that's the last opportunity I have for a question, but if my email address is here, phone number, if you have questions you'd like to reach out, please do so. Thank you again for having me.
has a hard stop at 2, so unfortunately won't be able to stay around for any questions. But I just wanted to take a moment to say I've been working with the team since right after the flood, and you heard a bit about what his team has been doing. But behind the scenes, they have been working all day, all night. How many? Almost 200 people on your team?
There's 152 in emergency services.
152 people who have been working on this for our community, and we talk about coordination and logistics and all of these organizations that are trying to volunteer and support and bring groups in. I just want to give another round of applause and thanks.
Thank you so much for coming. Have a nice weekend. See you next week. Same place, same time.
Great.